The stench hit me first. Rotting wood and something else, metallic and sharp. A single footprint, crimson against the cracked asphalt, sat nestled by the boarded-up entrance of cabin 3. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. We, the Lakeside Renegades, 5 college friends who hadn't seen each other since London, had stumbled upon Camp Hemlock, a forgotten summer camp nestled deep in the Adirondacks. A weekend getaway to rekindle the old flame of friendship, we'd said. Now, with darkness creeping in and a gruesome scene straight out of a horror movie in front of us, the flame felt more like a flicker in a howling wind. Liam, ever the cynic, scoffed. Probably a prank, Maya. We did love a good scare back then, remember? But his voice trembled ever so slightly. Maya, always the daredevil, was already yanking at the boards, a wild glint in her eyes. Hold on, Sarah, the voice of reason, intervened. Maybe we should. Her sentence was cut short by a strangled scream. We whipped around to see Emily, once the shy one, now a London fashion prodigy, pointing a trembling finger towards the mess hall. A single phrase echoed on the wind, chilling us to the bone. Bloody Mary. Inside, sprawled across a long-abandoned picnic table, was Jessica, our bubbly cheerleader from back in the day. Her vibrant smile was replaced by a gaping, lifeless stare. In her throat, a single playing card, the Queen of Spades. Panic, raw and primal, flooded my system. The following hours were a blur of accusations and fear. Maya, volatile as ever, accused Liam of harboring a grudge for losing the camp counselor competition all those years ago. Liam, in turn, pointed at Emily's newfound London ruthlessness. Perhaps she craved the notoriety of a campus killer story back in England. But the clues didn't quite fit. The brutality felt calculated, not fueled by rage. The Queen of Spades, a card synonymous with death, was it a twisted ritual, days blurred into nights. Supplies dwindled faster than our sanity. We barricaded ourselves into the main lodge. Sleep came in stolen moments, haunted by shadows and whispers in the wind. Then, the power went out. Plunged into darkness, we became sitting ducks. A blood-curdling scream ripped through the silence. Sarah. I found her in the rec room, a trail of playing cards leading to her, a jack of diamonds nestled by her cold hand. The killer meticulously placed them with each kill, mocking us, playing his own game. With dawn came a horrifying realization. The killer wasn't one of us. It was the old caretaker, Mr. Blackwood. We found his ramshackle cabin deeper in the woods. His diary revealed a twisted past, a string of unexplained accidents from past summers, children vanishing without a trace. He planned to recreate the macabre card game he'd learned in a derelict London pub, with his victims as his twisted deck. The final showdown was brutal. Mr. Blackwood, wielding a rusted axe, was a terrifying apparition against the rising sun. Liam, with a surprising burst of courage, disarmed him. The police found us, bloodied but alive, amidst the ruins of Camp Hemlock. As we limped away from the scene, a chilling truth settled in. Camp Hemlock wasn't haunted by ghosts of friendships past, but by a darkness far older, and far more evil. And somewhere in London, a tale of a macabre card game and a summer camp massacre would be whispered, waiting for its next audience. The fight with Mr. Blackwood was a chaotic ballet of fear and desperation. Liam, fueled by adrenaline, landed the first blow, a glancing swipe to the caretaker's shoulder with a crowbar we'd found in the lodge. The old man roared, a sound that seemed to peel the paint off the rotting cabin walls. He swung the axe with surprising speed, the rusty metal whistling past Liam's head. I lunged, tackling him into a heap of dusty floorboards. The struggle was a primal scream of survival. Teeth gritted, I wrestled the axe away, feeling the slick warmth of his blood on my knuckles. But Blackwood was strong, his desperation lending him unnatural power. He heads-butted me, a sickening crack splitting my vision. Stars exploded in my head as the axe clattered to the floor. Just as he lunged for my throat, a figure moved with impossible speed. Emily, her beautiful face contorted in a mask of fury, grabbed a rusted fire poker from the forgotten fireplace. The metal sang through the air, burying itself deep into Blackwood's side. He howled, the sound cut short by a death gurgle. He crumpled to the floor, his lifeless hand clutching a worn deck of cards, the jack of diamonds missing. We stood there, gasping for air, coated in a macabre mixture of sweat and blood. The silence that followed was deafening. It was Sarah who broke it, her voice a ragged whisper. We have to get out of here, but leaving wasn't so simple. The adrenaline drained away, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion and a gnawing sense of dread. Mr. Blackwood's diary had alluded to a hidden room, a trophy chamber. The thought of what horrors might lie within sent shivers down my spine. We searched with a morbid compulsion, finally uncovering a hidden trapdoor beneath a pile of moth-eaten blankets. As Emily pried it open, a wave of fetid air washed over us. We descended into the darkness, each step crunching on something brittle and bone-like. The stench hit me like a physical blow. The room, illuminated by the single flashlight we had, appeared to be some twisted shrine. Human bones, meticulously arranged, formed macabre decorations. Skulls leered at us from dusty shelves, their vacant eye sockets filled with playing cards. Then, I saw it. A lone figure huddled in the corner, rocking back and forth. It was a young girl, no older than 10, her eyes vacant, her body wrapped in a tattered summer camp uniform. In her hand, she clutched a card, the Queen of Spades. The sight of her filled me with a chilling horror far deeper than anything Mr. Blackwood could have inflicted. He wasn't just a killer, he was a monster who had been playing his twisted game for decades. As we stared, the girl mumbled, a broken doll repeating a single word over and over. Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary. Suddenly, the room plunged into darkness. The flashlight, our last vestige of hope, sputtered and died. We were trapped, prey in a darkness filled with the ghosts of his victims. A scream tore through the suffocating silence, then another, and another. The sounds were brutal, devoid of humanity, chilling cries that spoke of a violent struggle in the inky blackness. When the sun finally pierced through the cabin's dusty window, all that remained were the echoes of screams and the lingering smell of blood. Only Emily and I stumbled out of that room, forever marked by the horrors we had witnessed. We left Camp Hemlock behind, a monument to depravity, but the memories, and the knowledge of the darkness that still lurked in those woods, would forever haunt us. Escape from the trophy chamber wasn't a clean break. Emily, her face a mask of traumatized porcelain, practically dragged me out, my ankle a throbbing mess from a misplaced kick in the dark. The morning air, though crisp and life-affirming, couldn't wash away the stench of death that clung to us like a second skin. Then we saw the others. Sprawled in the clearing before the cabin, Liam and Sarah were grotesque marionettes, their limbs twisted at unnatural angles, playing cards pinned to their chests like macabre trophies. Panic, cold and metallic, flooded my system. This wasn't Blackwood anymore. This was something new, something crueler. A twig snapped behind us. We whirled around, hearts hammering against our ribs, only to see a lone deer staring at us with curious brown eyes. The tension, though momentarily broken, left us raw and jittery. We had to get out of there, but the question was how. The walk back to the main lodge was a nightmare. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of a branch, sent tremors through me. Reaching the lodge, we found a grisly tableau. The barricades were ripped apart, wood splintered like matchsticks. Inside, the furniture lay overturned, ransacked. A single, bloody footprint marked the floor, far too large to have belonged to Mr. Blackwood. Fear tightened its icy grip around my throat. This wasn't just some deranged caretaker anymore. This was a predator, someone who reveled in the hunt. We were cornered prey, and the walls of the lodge felt like they were closing in. Emily, ever the pragmatist, made a grim suggestion. We needed to create a diversion. We gathered flammable materials, old curtains, moth-eaten blankets, anything that would burn. In the flickering light of the dying fireplace, we devised a plan, a desperate gamble against a foe we didn't even understand. As dusk settled, casting long, skeletal shadows across the campgrounds, we set the lodge ablaze. The flames roared, a hungry beast consuming the rotting timber. We waited, hidden in the undergrowth, the heat licking at our exposed skin. The sound of approaching footsteps sent a jolt of terror through me. A hulking figure emerged from the woods, silhouetted against the inferno. It was far taller than Mr. Blackwood, its movements predatory and graceful. In its hand, glinting in the firelight, was a long, wickedly curved hunting knife. The trap was sprung. We charged out of the undergrowth, a desperate cry ripped from my throat. The figure whirled, its face obscured by shadow. A guttural growl escaped its lips, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. The fight that ensued was a brutal dance of survival. The flames from the lodge cast an eerie glow on the scene, illuminating the clearing in an unnatural orange light. As the figure lunged again, I saw a glimpse of its face, a grotesque caricature of a human, its eyes burning with an inhuman hunger. It wasn't just hunting us, it was toying with us. The fight devolved into a desperate scramble. We were exhausted, bloodied, our movements sluggish with terror. The figure cornered me by the lake, the icy water lapping at my heels. It raised the knife, a cruel smile splitting its face. Just then, a deafening crack echoed through the clearing. The figure froze, a look of surprise flickering across its monstrous features. A lone figure emerged from the smoke and flames, a makeshift bow in their hands, an arrow protruding from the figure's back. It was Sarah, her face streaked with ash and blood, but her eyes blazing with defiance. The wounded figure let out a deafening roar, but before it could react, the burning lodge groaned its last and collapsed, sending a shower of sparks and burning debris into the clearing. The figure, engulfed in flames, screamed a sound that curdled my blood. It thrashed for a moment, a horrifying marionette set ablaze, then crumpled into a smoldering heap. Silence descended, broken only by the crackle of dying embers and the labored gasps for breath from the three of us survivors. Dawn broke over a scene of utter devastation, the lake reflecting the smoldering remains of the lodge and the grotesque pyre where our attacker lay. We left Camp Hemlock as the first rays of sunlight pierced through the smoke-filled sky. Each of us carried the scars, both physical and mental. We left Camp Hemlock a mangled trio, the silence between us thicker than the smoke still clinging to our clothes. Sarah, her arm a mangled mess from the fight, leaned heavily on Emily as we stumbled towards the barely there dirt road that led out. My own ankle, a throbbing testament to the trophy chamber escape, protested with every step. The promise of dawn, however, was a cruel illusion. The rising sun only served to illuminate the full horror of our ordeal. The smoldering pyre of our attacker revealed nothing but charred bone and a glint of twisted metal, the remains of the hunting knife. No identifying features, no clues to who or what it was. As we reached the road, a sickening realization slammed into me. There were no tire tracks, no footprints leading away from the camp. We were the only ones who had left. A cold dread snaked its way down my spine. Had something gotten out? Was there more than one? The wait for help stretched into an eternity. Hours bled into each other, punctuated by the gnawing hunger in our bellies and the ever-present fear of unseen eyes watching us from the dense woods. When the first car finally rounded the bend, it wasn't the sleek rescue vehicle we'd envisioned. It was a beat-up pickup truck, driven by a wiry old man with eyes like chips of obsidian. He didn't ask questions, didn't seem surprised by our ragged appearance. He simply loaded us into the back, the silence punctuated only by the rhythmic cough of the engine. The ride to town was a blur of exhaustion and paranoia. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of the truck, sent fresh waves of terror through me. The town itself, nestled in a valley ringed by menacing mountains, felt like a character out of a horror movie. The buildings were boarded up, the streets deserted. An unsettling sense of desolation hung heavy in the air. The old man deposited us in front of a ramshackle diner, its windows greasy and dark. "You'll find what you need here, maybe," he rasped, his voice like dry leaves crunching underfoot. Before we could question him, he was gone, the truck disappearing around a corner in a cloud of dust. The diner was a haven of sorts, a flickering neon sign, the only beacon of life in the town. A gruff woman with a face etched with the lines of a hard life wordlessly brought us coffee and greasy burgers. We devoured them in a hungry silence, the tension in the booth as thick as the stale air. It was then, as I glanced out the window and saw a lone figure shrouded in a tattered cloak disappear into an alley, that a chilling realization dawned on me. The nightmare wasn't over. We hadn't escaped Camp Hemlock. Camp Hemlock had come with us. A low growl echoed from the alley, followed by a blood-curdling scream. My heart hammered against my ribs. We weren't just survivors anymore. We were bait. The scream ripped through the diner like a physical blow. Sarah and Emily, momentarily startled out of their stupor, lurched for the exits, only to be met by the slamming of the diner door. A heavy bolt clattered into place, sealing us in. The gruff woman, her face now twisted into a grotesque mask of glee, brandished a cleaver, its surface slick with something dark and glistening. "Fools," she rasped, her voice a gravelly whisper. "You brought him with you." My breath hitched. The figure from the alley wasn't alone. There were more, and this woman, this seemingly harmless proprietor, was part of something far more sinister than we ever imagined. Panic clawed at my throat. We were trapped, prey in a cage with a predator hungry for the kill. Emily, ever the resourceful one, lunged for a metal salt shaker on the counter, flinging its contents at the woman's eyes. Her enraged roar filled the diner as she stumbled back, momentarily blinded. That was our chance. We surged towards the back door, a flimsy barrier leading to a narrow kitchen. Sarah, fueled by adrenaline despite her mangled arm, shoved the door open. We piled through, the stench of grease and burnt food a stark contrast to the metallic tang of blood that now hung heavy in the air. The kitchen was a cramped maze of stainless steel counters and overflowing dumpsters. We scrambled through it, blindly pushing past clattering pots and pans. The roar of the woman echoed behind us, punctuated by the sickening thud of something heavy hitting the floor. A back door led into a narrow alley. We burst through, the cool night air a slap in the face. But freedom was a fleeting dream. The alley was a dead end, blocked at its far end by a towering figure shrouded in the darkness. Its eyes, two malevolent red orbs, glinted like embers. Panic threatened to consume me. We were trapped, cornered like rats. The woman, her scream laced with fury, emerged from the diner, her face now a bloody mess from Emily's salt attack. The cleaver, dripping crimson, gleamed in her hand. "Nowhere to run," she cackled, her voice raspy with bloodlust. "He's been waiting." The figure in the darkness took a lumbering step forward. In the flickering light of a dying street lamp, I caught a glimpse of its face, a grotesque parody of a human skull, its jaws agape, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. This wasn't human. This was something else entirely, a nightmare creature summoned from the darkest corners of the forest, it let out a blood-curdling roar, a sound that seemed to vibrate the very bones in my body. The woman, with a cruel smile, gestured towards us with the cleaver. "Entertain him." The world narrowed down to that creature, its fetid breath and gnashing teeth. We were cornered, facing the brutal dance of survival. Emily, her face a mask of grim determination, grabbed a discarded metal tray from the overflowing dumpster. Sarah, despite her injury, ripped a loose wooden slat from a nearby crate. I myself picked up a rusted wrench that lay forgotten on the grease-caked floor. We wouldn't go down without a fight, even if it was a fight we knew we couldn't win. The creature charged, a grotesque whirlwind of claws and teeth. Emily met its charge with a clang of the metal tray, momentarily deflecting its attack. I swung the wrench with all my might, connecting with a sickening crack on its bony skull. It roared in pain, but the sound was drowned out by Sarah's scream as the creature's razor-sharp claws raked across her shoulder. The fight was a desperate blur of clanging metal, bone-jarring impacts, and the sickening spray of blood. We were outmatched, outmaneuvered by the creature's relentless ferocity. One by one, we fell. Emily, her arm mangled beyond recognition, crumpled to the ground. Sarah, her face a canvas of blood and despair, lay motionless. And then, there was just me. The creature loomed over me, its fetid breath washing over me. I raised the wrench, a pathetic weapon against such a monstrosity. But in my eyes, there was no fear, only a cold, steely resolve. I wouldn't let it have the satisfaction of a whimpering death. The creature lunged, its jaws snapping shut. The world went dark, but not silent. A high-pitched ringing filled my ears, punctuated by the wet rasp of the creature's breath and the sickening crunch of bone. Pain, a white-hot poker, lanced through my shoulder, but adrenaline held it at bay for precious seconds. Blinking back the encroaching darkness, I saw an image straight out of a fever dream. Sarah, lying crumpled a few feet away, was a crimson stain on the grimy pavement. But it was Emily who held my attention. She wasn't dead. Not yet. In a scene ripped from a horror movie, the creature had pinned her to the ground, its monstrous jaw clamped down on her arm. Emily's screams were a ragged, wet gurgle, her body convulsing with every chomp. Her eyes, wide with a horrifying mix of terror and defiance, met mine. Something primal roared to life inside me. It wasn't bravery, not exactly. It was a primal hunger for survival, a desperate refusal to become another stain on the cold pavement. My gaze fell on the discarded metal tray. It lay a few feet away, glinting malevolently in the flickering streetlight. With a surge of adrenaline that masked the pain in my shoulder, I lunged for it. The movement, however minimal, must have alerted the creature. It lifted its head, its eyes gleaming with predatory amusement. I scrambled back, the tray clattering uselessly against the uneven pavement. The creature turned its attention back to Emily, its hunger palpable. Its jaws began to work again, a sickening rhythm that threatened to drown out the world. Desperation clawed at my throat. I had nothing. Nothing but a rusty wrench and a broken body. But then, I saw it, the cleaver. The woman, forgotten in the chaos, lay sprawled at the foot of a dumpster, her head grotesquely twisted at an unnatural angle. The cleaver, slick with blood and viscera, lay beside her outstretched hand. With a final, desperate surge of adrenaline, I launched myself towards it. The world became a blur of movement as I scrambled across the greasy pavement. The creature roared, a sound that seemed to shake the very buildings around us. Just as it lunged, its fetid breath washing over my face, I reached the cleaver. It was heavy, cold, and slick with blood, but it was my only weapon. I rose, the cleaver held high. The creature stopped its lunge, its head tilted in a bizarre parody of curiosity. We stood there for a single, breathless moment, locked in a primal standoff. Then, with a roar that seemed to split the night sky, it charged. The ensuing fight was a brutal ballet of desperation and primal fury. I swung the cleaver wildly, the weight of it nearly pulling me off balance. The creature, a whirlwind of claws and teeth, was relentless. It swiped at me with a massive paw, tearing a deep gash across my chest. The pain was a searing fire, but I ignored it. Finally, in a desperate lunge, I managed to connect with the cleaver, the blade burying itself deep into the creature's shoulder. It roared in pain, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. The momentum of the blow knocked us both back, me sprawling onto the cold pavement, the creature crashing into a nearby dumpster. For a moment, there was stunned silence. Then, with a sickening creak, the dumpster gave way, its metal sides collapsing under the creature's weight. The creature let out a startled yelp as it tumbled inside, a tangled mess of claws, bone, and garbage. I scrambled to my feet, my vision blurring from pain and blood loss. Looking down, I saw the cleaver, the symbol of my Pyrrhic victory, lying at my feet. Then, a low growl cut through the night. The creature, half buried in the wreckage of the dumpster, was thrashing with renewed fury. Its eyes, burning with a malevolent intelligence, locked onto mine. With a final, earth-shaking roar, it surged forward, its monstrous form pushing aside the debris. It was wounded, enraged, and determined to finish what it had started. My legs buckled beneath me. Exhaustion, both physical and mental, threatened to consume me. But as the creature loomed closer, a horrifying realization slammed into me. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. We were pawns in a much larger game, a game played in the shadows by forces beyond our comprehension. And Camp Hemlock, with its macabre past and monstrous secrets, was just the beginning. The nightmare had only just begun. The creature erupted from the dumpster, a grotesque gargoyle emerging from a pit of filth. Pain, a white-hot symphony conducting every movement, urged me to flee. Yet, my body refused to obey. My gaze darted to the cleaver, slick with blood and my own desperation. It wouldn't be enough, the beast howled, a sound that scraped against my sanity. Then, a glint of movement caught my eye. The fallen woman, her head still at an unnatural angle, clutched a rusty revolver in her lifeless hand. Hope, a fragile butterfly amidst the storm of despair, fluttered in my chest. Scrambling on my hands and knees, I ignored the searing protest of my shoulder, the wrench clattering uselessly beside me. Reaching the woman, a metallic tang filled my nostrils. Blood, and something else, something ancient and rotten. Snatching the revolver, I fumbled with the cold metal. It was heavy, unfamiliar in my trembling hands. 6 chambers stared back at me, each a flicker of defiance in the face of oblivion. The creature was upon me, a fetid wind ruffling my hair. Raising the gun with a shaking hand, I aimed for its single visible eye. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble against a monster fueled by something far more primal than earthly rage. The trigger felt heavy, a world of resistance against the meager pull of my finger. The world went slow. The creature's roar became a distorted echo, its gnashing jaws a blurred image. The gun roared, the sound a deafening crack that split the night sky. A geyser of blood erupted from the creature's eye socket, painting the alley in a grotesque tableau. It stumbled back, momentarily stunned. I forced myself to my feet, legs weak and wobbly. Another shot. Then another, the sound of the gun a grim counterpoint to the creature's enraged roars. Each bullet found its mark, a shoulder, a leg, a sickening spray of viscera, but the creature, though reeling, wouldn't be stopped. It lunged, a blur of claws and teeth, a monstrous embodiment of an unstoppable hunger. The gun clicked empty in my hand, a useless hunk of metal. The creature slammed into me, its massive form knocking me to the ground. The world spun, a kaleidoscope of pain and fear. Hot breath washed over my face, the stench of decay filling my lungs. This was it. This was the end. Then, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night. A new scream, not mine, not the creature's. It was a high-pitched shriek, laced with a chilling inhuman glee. The creature froze, its head swiveling towards the source of the sound. From the shadows emerged a figure, cloaked in darkness. It looked vaguely human, yet something was off, elongated limbs, unnatural agility. In its hand, it clutched a wickedly curved blade, the metal gleaming with an otherworldly light. With a speed that defied logic, the figure was upon the creature. The fight was a blur of inhuman violence, a whirlwind of steel against bone, punctuated by the creature's enraged roars. Each strike of the figure's blade was as precise as a surgeon's scalpel, tearing gashes into the creature's flesh with sickening ease. It was a one-sided battle, a brutal ballet of slaughter. The creature, weakened by my desperate attack, stood no chance. Finally, with a bone-chilling shriek that seemed to rip through the veil of reality, the creature crumpled, its lifeless form a grotesque heap on the pavement. The cloaked figure stood over the carcass, its blade dripping with a luminescent ichor. Slowly, it turned towards me. For a moment, our eyes met. Its gaze was cold, devoid of any human emotion, yet I sensed something else within it, a flicker of recognition, a chilling sense of familiarity. Then, with a swift movement, the figure turned and vanished into the night, leaving me alone in the blood-soaked alley with the stench of death and the weight of unspeakable horrors clinging to me like a shroud. As the first rays of dawn painted the sky a bloodshot red, the silence pressed down on me, suffocating and heavy. I didn't know if I was a survivor or a pawn in a game I barely understood. The nightmare might be over for now, but the memory of Camp Hemlock and the secrets it held would forever haunt me. And somewhere, in the shadows, something else stirred, a dark entity waiting for its next move, its next game. The true horror, I realized with a chilling certainty, had only just begun. Dawn arrived like a cruel joke, painting the blood-slicked alley in an ironic wash of pale gold. The stench of death hung heavy, a metallic tang mingling with the acrid reek of burnt garbage. I lay there, a broken marionette sprawled amongst the carnage. My vision swam, a kaleidoscope of red and black. Pain, a constant symphony conducting every ragged breath, urged me to stay down. But the memory of the cloaked figure, its inhuman grace and chilling awareness, spurred me on. I dragged myself towards the fallen woman, the revolver clutched like a talisman in my trembling hand. The bullet wounds I inflicted on the creature gaped like grotesque mouths, oozing an oily, black ichor. It looked unnatural, alien, reaching the woman's body. A fresh wave of nausea washed over me. Her eyes, even in death, were wide with a terror that mirrored my own. As I touched her hand, the revolver slipped from my grasp, clattering uselessly beside her. A silver locket, hidden beneath her blood-drenched blouse, caught my eye. Prying it open, I gasped. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a faded photograph. It depicted two young girls, their faces beaming with a youthful innocence. Beneath it, a single inscription, Sarah and Emily, Camp Hemlock, 1978. My blood ran cold. This woman wasn't just some deranged accomplice. She was one of the missing children, grown old and twisted by the horror she'd witnessed. The picture, a tangible link to Sarah and Emily, sent a fresh wave of despair crashing down on me. A guttural growl from behind ripped me from my thoughts. The creature, or what remained of it, wasn't dead. One massive arm twitched, claw scraping against the pavement. Panic clawed at my throat. It had survived my bullets, but would it survive the inhuman entity that stalked the shadows? The growl morphed into a whimper, a pathetic plea for survival. I stared at the creature, the monstrous visage that had moments ago threatened to rip me apart. Now, it was just a wounded animal, whimpering on the pavement. A primal urge to finish it off clawed at me, a desperate need to avenge Sarah and Emily, to escape this nightmare. But the image of the cloaked figure, its cold, emotionless eyes, held me back. Something had shifted. The game had changed. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about understanding the forces at play, the entities that lurked in the shadows of Camp Hemlock and beyond. With a strength born of desperation, I grabbed the broken end of the wrench. The creature flinched, its one remaining eye pleading for mercy. But mercy was a luxury I couldn't afford. As the dawn light cast an even more brutal light on the scene, I brought the wrench down, not on the creature's skull, but on its mangled leg. The scream that followed was unlike anything I'd ever heard, a sound that defied description, a raw, primal agony that reverberated through the alley. The creature thrashed, its remaining limbs flailing uselessly. Tears streamed down my face, a mixture of pain, despair, and a strange, unsettling satisfaction. This wasn't victory. Not by a long shot. But it was a statement of defiance, a small act of vengeance in the face of an unfathomable evil. As the creature's screams finally subsided, I sank back against the dumpster, my body a wreck, my spirit shattered. The cloaked figure, if it was still watching, wouldn't see a conquering hero. It would see a broken man, forever marked by the horrors of Camp Hemlock, clinging to the fragile hope that escape, even temporary escape, was still possible. But deep down, as I stared at the blood-soaked dawn sky, a chilling certainty settled in. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning, a single horrifying chapter in a story far darker, far more complex than I could ever have imagined. And somewhere, in the shadows beyond the reach of the rising sun, the whispers of a name echoed, Camp Hemlock. A name that would forever haunt my dreams, a macabre invitation to a game I never wanted to play. The days that followed were a blur of bone-deep exhaustion and a gnawing sense of unease. I drifted in and out of consciousness in a dingy hospital room, the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitors the only constant in a world that seemed to tilt on its axis. The memories, when they came, were like shards of broken glass, the grotesque trophy room, the brutal fight with the creature, the chilling presence of the cloaked figure. The police were no help. My story, a tangled mess of missing children, deranged caretakers, and a monster from beyond nightmares, was met with skepticism and thinly veiled disgust. Even the locket, a tangible link to the missing girls, was dismissed as a morbid souvenir, a twisted relic of a forgotten tragedy. But I knew better. Camp Hemlock wasn't a tragedy. It was a festering wound, a gateway to something far more sinister. And the cloaked figure wasn't a lone wolf. It was a player, a pawn in a larger game whose rules I didn't understand. When I was finally released from the hospital, a frail shell of my former self, a single address scribbled on a crumpled napkin was tucked into my pocket. It was the address of the old woman who had driven us out of town, the woman with eyes like chips of obsidian and a knowing smile. There was no logic to my decision, no grand plan. It was a primal urge, a desperate need for answers, even if those answers led me deeper into the darkness. The ride to the small, dilapidated town nestled in the shadow of the menacing mountains was a journey into the heart of dread. The streets were deserted, the houses boarded up, the air thick with a suffocating silence. The old woman's house stood at the end of a dusty road, a ramshackle structure shrouded in an aura of decay. As I approached, a single raven perched on the porch railing cawed raucously, its obsidian eyes seeming to bore into my soul. A knot of apprehension tightened in my gut, but I pushed forward. A weathered wooden sign creaked on its hinges as I pushed open the creaky door. The interior was dark and dusty, the air thick with the scent of old books and something cloying metallic. A single flickering candle cast dancing shadows on the walls. In the center of the room, the old woman sat hunched over a dusty table, a collection of tarnished silver instruments spread before her. As I stepped inside, she looked up, her eyes gleaming with an unsettling anticipation. "You've come," she rasped, her voice a dry whisper. "The child of Hemlock. Come to learn the truth." A shiver ran down my spine. "What is this place? Who are you?" I demanded, my voice hoarse from disuse. The woman cackled, a sound like brittle leaves crunching underfoot. "This," she gestured around the room, "is the nexus, the bridge between worlds." "And I," she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "am the keeper, the one who ensures the balance." My blood ran cold. "What balance? What are you talking about?" A chilling smile spread across the woman's face. "The balance between worlds," she repeated, her voice gaining a maniacal edge. "The night feeds on the day, the shadows dance with the light. The creatures you encountered, that they are merely pawns, players in a game far grander than you can imagine, a game," she leaned forward, her eyes glinting with a predatory hunger, "that you, unwittingly, have become a part of." Terror constricted my throat. I was trapped, a fly caught in a web of ancient horrors. Before I could respond, the woman raised one gnarled hand. On her finger, glinting under the flickering candlelight, was a familiar object, a silver ring embedded with a single black diamond, identical to the card the Jack of Diamonds clutched in the trophy room. "The game has just begun," the woman declared, her voice echoing eerily in the dusty room. "And you, child of Hemlock, are its newest player." The darkness outside seemed to press closer, as if eager to swallow me whole. I had escaped Camp Hemlock, but I had stumbled into something far more terrifying. The nightmare, I realized with a chilling certainty, wasn't over. It had just entered a new, far more brutal, far more violent phase. The old woman's words hung in the air like a venomous curse. My mind reeled, the weight of the revelation crushing me. Camp Hemlock wasn't just some isolated horror, it was a battleground in a cosmic war, and I, a broken pawn thrust onto the chessboard. A wave of nausea washed over me, fueled by the acrid metallic tang in the air. My gaze fell on the silver instruments, scalpels, bone saws, gleaming under the flickering candlelight. An unsettling truth clicked into place. The balance the woman spoke of wasn't some abstract concept. It was maintained through violence, through a brutal culling of those who stumbled too close to the darkness. Fear, primal and cold, clawed at my throat. I had to get out of there, before I became another sacrifice on this grotesque altar. But before I could move, a chilling sensation prickled at the back of my neck. The raven on the porch cawed again, a harsh, insistent sound. Then, from the shadows beyond the flickering candlelight, a figure emerged. The cloaked figure from the alley, its inhuman silhouette a monstrous parody of a human form. But this time, it wasn't alone. Two more figures emerged, their movements eerily synchronized, their eyes glowing with the same malevolent red light as the first. The woman cackled, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Welcome," she rasped, her voice dripping with a twisted amusement, "to the Guardians." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the encroaching silence. The figures advanced, their steps slow and deliberate, the air around them crackling with an unseen energy. Escape was a fleeting dream. This was a fight for survival, a brutal dance of life and death on the precipice of oblivion. I lunged for a heavy brass candlestick, the only weapon readily available. It felt flimsy, pathetic against the approaching figures. But it was all I had. The first cloaked figure lashed out, its inhumanly long arm ending in a razor-sharp claw. I parried the blow with the candlestick, the metal clanging with a sickening ring. The impact sent a jolt of pain through my already battered body. The fight was a blur of violence. The Guardians moved with an inhuman grace, their claws and blades flashing in the flickering light. I dodged, I parried, the adrenaline pumping through my veins masking the searing pain in my body. but I was outnumbered, outmatched. A blow connected with my shoulder, ripping through flesh and muscle. I screamed in agony, the sound raw and primal. The brass candlestick clattered to the floor, useless against the relentless assault. Just as a razor-sharp claw was about to descend upon me, a deafening crack echoed through the room. The old woman, her face contorted in a mask of fury, had brought down a heavy tome from a shelf behind her. It slammed into the cloaked figure's head, sending it reeling back. "Fools," she shrieked, her voice cracking with rage. "You disrupt the ritual." The remaining figures turned their inhuman gazes on her, their red eyes burning with a cold fury. A low growl rumbled from their throats, a sound that promised a swift and brutal demise. The woman, for all her cruelty, was my only hope. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the white-hot pain in my shoulder. We were on the same side now, two pawns united against a larger threat. "Get to the cellar," she rasped, gesturing towards a trapdoor in the corner. "There's a passage, a way out." Hesitation flickered in my mind. What awaited me below could be worse than what faced me above. But the red eyes of the cloaked figures were my answer. With a desperate lunge, I scrambled for the trapdoor, the floorboards groaning under my weight. As I tumbled through the opening, the woman's scream echoed down after me, a chilling counterpoint to the guttural growls above. The trapdoor slammed shut, plunging me into a suffocating darkness. The stale, dusty air hung heavy, the smell of damp earth filling my nostrils. Panic clawed at me, but I forced myself to crawl, the rough wooden floorboards scraping against my raw skin. The passage was narrow, barely big enough for me to squeeze through. But it offered a sliver of hope, a desperate gamble against the horrors above. The sound of the fight upstairs, a cacophony of screams and crashes, faded as I crawled deeper into the darkness. Then, silence. A heavy, oppressive silence that felt like a physical weight pressing down on me. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I felt the earth gave way beneath my fingertips, not to a solid floor but a loose cascade of dirt and rubble. A gasp escaped my lips as I tumbled down a hidden chute, the descent a sickening blur of scrapes and bumps. The world spun, my vision a kaleidoscope of flickering candlelight fading into the abyss. Pain exploded in my ankle as I landed with a bone-jarring thud. Darkness, thick and suffocating, pressed in from all sides. For a moment, I lay there, gasping for breath, the silence broken only by the insistent throb of my injuries. Then, a faint sound reached my ears, a rhythmic dripping, slow and deliberate. My heart hammered against my ribs. Water. There must be a cavern or tunnel nearby. With a groan, I forced myself upright, the throbbing in my ankle a dull ache against the symphony of pain in the rest of my body. Using the rough wall as support, I limped forward, my hand outstretched, feeling my way through the inky blackness. The air grew colder, dampness clinging to my clothes like a second skin. The dripping sound grew louder, a constant counterpoint to my ragged breaths. Then, my hand brushed against something smooth and cold. It felt like a stone wall, but something about the texture sent shivers down my spine. As I traced the outline, my fingers brushed against a series of grooves, a pattern etched into the surface, an inscription. The adrenaline rush from the discovery momentarily masked the pain. Fumbling for my lighter, I flicked it on, the tiny flame casting a dancing shadow on the wall. The inscription, carved into the ancient stone, sent a jolt of terror through me. It wasn't letters or symbols, but a series of crudely drawn figures, grotesque beasts, clawed hands reaching from the darkness, and a single, horrifying eye staring back at me. The world tilted as a wave of dizziness washed over me. The carvings, their macabre significance, were too much to process. But the dripping sound was louder now, insistent, closer. I stumbled back, my foot splashing in a cold, viscous liquid that oozed from a crack in the floor. Terror, primal and cold, flooded my veins. The liquid wasn't just water. It was thick, crimson red, and faintly metallic. Blood. A lot of blood. Then, from the darkness ahead, a faint glow flickered into view. A bioluminescent fungus, I told myself, desperately trying to rationalize the fear. But as I inched closer, the light grew stronger, revealing a horrifying sight. The passage opened into a vast cavern, its jagged, rocky walls illuminated not by fungus, but by hundreds of glowing red eyes. Staring back at me, packed tightly together like macabre jewels, were the eyes of the creatures from the alley, from the trophy room. Dozens, maybe hundreds, their grotesque forms hidden in the shadows, their guttural growls echoing through the cavern. My scream died in my throat, a strangled gasp lost in the cavernous space. I wasn't at the end of the passage. I had stumbled into the heart of the nightmare, a monstrous feeding ground where the darkness feasted on the bones of its victims. The stench of decay hit me then, a wave of putrid flesh and death that threatened to overpower me. Panic propelled me forward, a desperate gamble against the horrors in the darkness. I ran, my ankles screaming in protest, towards the only exit I could see, a narrow tunnel at the far end of the cavern, barely wide enough for me to squeeze through. As I reached it, the ground trembled beneath a deafening roar. The creatures, alerted by my presence, were surging forward. With a final burst of adrenaline, I scrambled through the gap, the jagged rocks tearing at my clothes, the stench of death overwhelming. The tunnel plunged deeper into the earth, a suffocating narrow space that scraped against my raw skin with every desperate crawl. Behind me, the guttural growls grew louder, closer. I could almost feel their fetid breath on my neck. The air grew thin, stale, making it hard to breathe. Just when my lungs were about to burst, the tunnel opened into a small chamber. Exhausted, I collapsed onto the cold, damp floor, my vision blurring at the edges. But even in my delirious state, I noticed a single object glinting in the faint moonlight filtering through a crack in the ceiling. It was a silver key, identical to the one Sarah had clutched in her hand. Hope, a fragile ember, flickered in my chest. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was a way out. Clawing at the key, the metal felt icy against my sweating palm. My ragged breaths echoed in the chamber, a counterpoint to the distant, frustrated snarls of the creatures. Escape. The word echoed in my head, a desperate chant against the encroaching darkness. But escape wasn't a simple concept in this place. This key, like everything else at Camp Hemlock, seemed tainted by a brutal purpose. As I turned it in the rusted lock embedded in the chamber wall, a cold dread slithered down my spine. The clicking wasn't a smooth release, but a grinding, tortured symphony of metal. A low groan resonated from the wall, the sound growing in intensity until the chamber vibrated around me. Dust rained down from cracks in the ceiling, and the moonlight filtering through the crevice sputtered and died. Panic clawed at my throat, but it was too late to turn back. The groan reached a crescendo, then abruptly stopped. Silence, thick and heavy, hung in the air. Then, with a horrifying crack, the wall split open, revealing a passage shrouded in an unnatural darkness. A darkness that pulsed with a faint bioluminescent glow, hinting at horrors unseen. This wasn't an escape. It was a different kind of trap, a descent into a deeper abyss. But the snarling from the other tunnel had ceased, replaced by a chilling silence. The choice was stark: face the unknown or be devoured by the creatures above. With a deep breath, I stepped into the pulsating darkness. The passage was narrow, barely wider than my shoulders, and slick with a cold, slimy film. The air grew heavy, thick with the cloying sweetness of decay. Each footstep was a gamble, a plunge into the unknown. The bioluminescent glow intensified, revealing grotesque murals etched into the walls. Images of sacrifices, of twisted rituals, and of a monstrous entity with glowing red eyes that bore an uncanny resemblance to the creatures above. The passage twisted and turned, becoming a labyrinth carved into the living flesh of the earth. The silence pressed in, broken only by the dripping of unseen fluids and the frantic hammering of my own heart. Then, a sound pierced the oppressive silence, a rhythmic rasping, wet and sickening. Around a bend, the passage opened into a vast cavern. But this wasn't the feeding ground of the other creatures. This was a place of torture, a monstrous laboratory bathed in the sickly green glow of glowing fungi, and in the center, chained to a crude altar, lay the cloaked figure. Its once inhuman form was mangled and broken, flesh ripped from its bones, revealing a grotesque parody of humanity beneath. But it was alive, its remaining eye glowing with a malevolent intelligence. As I stumbled into the cavern, the rasping grew louder. A swarm of monstrous insects, their bodies segmented and chitinous, scuttled over the cloaked figure's exposed flesh. They fed, their mandibles tearing away at flesh and bone, their buzzing a macabre soundtrack to the scene. The figure gurgled, its voice a wet rasp. "You. Pawn. Disrupted. The ritual." The words fueled a surge of fury within me. This entity, this puppeteer behind the scenes, had orchestrated the horrors at Camp Hemlock, using the children, the creatures, all as pawns in its twisted game. The primal rage, honed by days of fear and pain, surged through me. Spotting a heavy metal rod leaning against the wall, I lunged for it. The cloaked figure's single eye widened, a flicker of something akin to fear crossing its inhuman face. The creature released a guttural shriek as I brought the rod down on its remaining leg, the sickening crack echoing through the cavern. It thrashed on the altar, the insects scattering in a frenzy. Blow after bone-jarring blow rained down, a brutal symphony of vengeance. The creature's shrieks turned into gurgling moans, then finally, silence. The insects, deprived of their meal, buzzed angrily around the mangled corpse. I collapsed beside the altar, my body racked with sobs, the metallic tang of blood heavy in the air. But the victory, if it could be called such, was hollow. The silence was filled with a new sound, a rumbling, a tremor that echoed through the cavern walls. The ground began to shake, dust raining down from the ceiling. The key. Panic jolted me back to reality. The chamber, the passage.it was collapsing. This was not the end of the nightmare, just another horrifying chapter. Grasping the key, I sprinted back through the slick passage, the tremors growing stronger with each passing moment. Debris rained down behind me, the air thick with dust. Just as I reached the chamber, the stone slab slammed shut with a deafening boom, sealing the passage behind me just as a monstrous tentacle, thick as a tree trunk and dripping with bioluminescent goo, smashed against the wall where I'd just been standing. The air in the chamber grew thick and hot, the stench of ozone and burnt flesh stinging my nostrils. Above, a monstrous roar echoed, shaking the chamber itself. The creature, enraged and wounded, was tearing its way through the collapsed passage. Panic threatened to consume me, but the cold weight of the key in my hand spurred me on. There had to be another way out. Spotting another crevice in the ceiling, a sliver of pale moonlight streaming through, I clambered towards it with a desperate strength fueled by sheer terror. The roar grew louder, closer. Rocks rained down around me as the creature's rage tore at the chamber. My fingers clawed at the jagged edges, pulling myself up with a final, agonizing heave. The moonlight bathed the surface above in an ethereal glow. It was a sheer cliff face, a drop of hundreds of feet to the jagged rocks below. But below, nestled in the shadow of a giant rock formation, a faint, flickering light hinted at something. An exit. With a deep breath, I grasped the silver key tightly in my hand. This wasn't a key to a door, but a horrifying choice. The climb down the cliff face was a dance with death, each handhold precarious, each step a gamble. But every agonizing movement brought me closer to the faint light below. Just as I reached the bottom, the cavern above erupted. A monstrous tentacle burst through the ceiling, its tip scraping past where I had just been. The chamber groaned, the stone walls buckling under the pressure. Below, nestled in the rock formation, was a small, ramshackle wooden shack, its windows glowing with a warm orange light. As I lunged towards the rickety door, a deafening crack echoed across the night. The chamber above collapsed, a monstrous avalanche of stone and debris swallowing the creature and the key with it. The door gave way under the force of my body, sending me sprawling onto the dusty floor. Inside, a single flickering oil lamp cast long shadows on the rough-hewn walls. An old woman, her face etched with a lifetime of hardship, sat by a small fire, a steaming mug clutched in her hands. She looked at me, a flicker of recognition in her weathered eyes. "You have the face of one who has walked with shadows," she rasped, her voice raspy with age. Tears streamed down my face, a mixture of relief and exhaustion. I escaped," I choked out, the words raw in my throat. The woman nodded slowly. "You did. But the game, child, is far from over. The echoes of Camp Hemlock will follow you, a constant whisper in the dark." I slumped beside the fire, the warmth seeping into my battered body. Escape, I realized with a chilling certainty, wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a new fight, a battle against a darkness that stretched far beyond the confines of Camp Hemlock. A darkness I now bore the mark of, a chilling reminder of the horrors I had witnessed, the choices I had made, and the key I had lost, the key that would forever unlock a part of me, a part forever bound to the shadows. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the wall, and for a moment, I could almost swear I saw the faint outline of a monstrous entity with glowing red eyes, a chilling premonition of the battles yet to come.